The Galactic Council Imperium had ruled the stars for over 200,000 standard cycles. It was not a government in the way most young species understood the word. It was more like a machine, a very old, very large, very cold machine that crushed anything that did not fit inside its gears. 4,000 species lived under its authority. Some had joined willingly, most had not, but all of them had learned the same lesson sooner or later. The Council did not ask. The Council told. And if you did not listen, the Council made sure you never spoke again. At the top of this machine sat the elder races. These were species so ancient that they had forgotten more history than most civilizations had ever made. The Drethari were the oldest of them all. They were tall, pale creatures with 4 arms and eyes like black glass. They moved slowly, spoke softly, and carried themselves with the confidence of a species that had never once been afraid of anything. Their homeworld, Draydos, was the seat of the Council. Their supreme arbiter, a being named Korath Velshan, had held power for over 900 cycles. He was patient, he was intelligent, and he believed with every fiber of his ancient body that the galaxy had a natural order, and that order placed his kind at the very top. Below the elder races were the mid-tier species. These were civilizations that had proven themselves useful enough to earn a voice in the Council, though not loud enough to matter. Below them were the client states. These were species that had been conquered or absorbed long ago. They served the Imperium in exchange for the right to continue existing. And at the very bottom, lower than the client states, lower than the service castes, lower than anything else in the galactic hierarchy, were the newly contacted species. The ones who had just been found, the ones who had not yet learned their place. Humanity was one of these. 40 years before this story begins, a GCI survey fleet had picked up radio signals coming from a small yellow star in the outer arm of the galaxy. They followed the signals and found a blue planet covered in water and noise. The creatures living on it called themselves humans. They were small, soft, short-lived, and remarkably loud. The survey fleet cataloged them as a Tier 7 civilization, pre-ascendant, no faster than light travel, no unified planetary government, no significant military capability. They were given provisional observer status in the Council, which meant they could sit in the Great Chamber and watch, but they could not vote, could not trade freely, and had no military protection under Council law. In simple terms, humanity was allowed to exist, but only barely. For 40 years, humanity played the role it had been given. Earth sent ambassadors to Drethos. They smiled. They nodded. They sat in the back of the Great Chamber and listened to species that were 1,000,000 years old talk about trade routes and resource allocations and border disputes that had been going on longer than human civilization had existed. They were ignored. They were insulted. They were treated like children who had wandered into a room full of adults. The current human ambassador was a woman named Ilara Vasquez. She was 53 years old, which made her practically an infant by the standards of most Council species. She had dark hair streaked with silver, sharp eyes, and a face that could shift from warm to ice cold in the space of a heartbeat. She had been Earth's voice on Drethos for 11 years, and in that time she had learned something that most young species never figured out. She had learned that the Council was not as strong as it looked. Oh, it was powerful. There was no question about that. The combined military of the Imperium could burn 1,000 worlds without breaking a sweat, but power and strength were not the same thing. Vasquez had watched carefully. She had seen how the elder races argued behind closed doors. She had seen how the mid-tier species whispered about rebellion but never acted. She had seen how the client states served with dead eyes and clenched fists. The Imperium was held together not by loyalty or respect or shared purpose. It was held together by fear. And fear, Vasquez knew, was a chain that could be broken. But she also knew that humanity was not ready to break it. Not yet. So she smiled. She nodded. She played the game. And she sent coded reports back to Earth every single week. Back on Earth, something was happening that the Council did not know about. Humanity had created the United Defense Compact, a secret military alliance that united every major nation on the planet under a single purpose. That purpose was survival. Because the leaders of Earth were not stupid. They had looked at the galaxy and seen the truth that the Council broadcast every single day without realizing it. The truth was simple. In this galaxy, the weak were eaten, and humanity was very, very weak. so they decided to stop being weak. Every piece of alien technology that came near Earth was studied. Every trade sample, every communication device, every scrap of material from every diplomatic visit was quietly taken apart, analyzed, and understood. Human engineers did not just copy what they found, they improved it. They asked questions that the original builders had never thought to ask. They found flaws that species 1,000,000 years older had never noticed. And they built things in secret. Deep in the asteroid belt, hidden among billions of rocks, shipyards came to life. On Titan, beneath the frozen surface, factories hummed. In the Kuiper belt, far from any alien sensor, weapons were tested. Humanity was building a fleet. Not a small one, not a symbolic one. A real fleet, with real weapons, designed by a species that had spent its entire history fighting itself and had gotten very, very good at it. They called it the Black Fleet. And nobody in the galaxy knew it existed. While all of this was happening in secret, the public face of humanity remained what it had always been: harmless, eager, a little bit annoying. The council species looked at humans and saw a young race that talked too much, bred too fast, and had an irritating habit of asking questions about everything. Most of them simply ignored humanity, but not all of them. Supreme Arbiter Korath Velshan did not ignore humanity. He watched them carefully, and what he saw made him uncomfortable, not afraid. Korath had never been afraid of anything in 900 cycles of life, but uncomfortable. There was something about humans that did not fit. They adapted too quickly. They learned too fast. They smiled too easily in the face of insults that would have broken other young species. And they were everywhere. In 40 years, human traders, diplomats, scientists, and travelers had spread across dozens of systems. They made friends easily. They learned alien languages with disturbing speed. They asked questions that made elder race scientists pause and think. Korath decided that humanity was a problem. Not a big problem. Not yet, but a growing one. And in his long experience, growing problems were best dealt with before they finished growing. He began to work quietly. He spoke to the other members of the inner circle, the small group of elder race leaders who truly controlled the council. He planted ideas. He raised concerns. He pointed to population growth charts and expansion rates and asked his colleagues a simple question: what happens when this species, which breeds like insects and thinks like predators, decides it wants more than an observer seat? The inner circle listened. They did not need much convincing. Most of them already looked at humanity the way a farmer looks at weeds. All they needed was an excuse. The excuse came 6 months later. A GCI trade convoy was destroyed near the edge of the Sol system. 14 ships, all carrying valuable cargo, all reduced to debris. The attack was precise and brutal. And when council investigators examined the wreckage, they found evidence pointing directly at human insurgents. Hidden weapon signatures, communication fragments, navigation data that traced back to Earth. It was all fake, every single piece of it, planted by Korath's agents with the precision of a species that had been manipulating galactic politics for longer than most civilizations had existed. But the council did not investigate further. It did not need to. The evidence was enough. The verdict had been written before the convoy was even destroyed. The full council convened in the Great Chamber on Drathos. 4,000 species were represented. The chamber was vast, a cathedral of alien architecture that stretched so high the ceiling disappeared into artificial clouds. Ambassador Vasquez sat in humanity's small seat at the very back, watching the proceedings with steady eyes. The vote was quick. Edict 7 Omega was passed with overwhelming support. It authorized a corrective action against Earth, not a war. The Council did not go to war with Tier 7 species. War implied an equal opponent. This was a discipline action, a punishment, a reminder to every young species in the galaxy about what happened when you stepped out of line. Before the session ended, Vasquez stood. The chamber fell quiet, not out of respect, but out of curiosity. What would the humans say? She looked across the vast room. She looked at the elder races in their high seats. She looked at Korath Velshan, sitting on his ancient throne like a god passing judgment on an insect, and she spoke. Her voice was calm and clear and carried to every corner of that enormous chamber. You do not want to do this. That was all she said. 5 words. The chamber was silent for a moment. Then someone laughed. Then more joined in. Within seconds, The entire council was laughing. 4,000 species, laughing at the tiny human woman who thought she could threaten the most powerful institution in the galaxy with 5 words. Vasquez did not react. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She stood there and let them laugh. And when the laughter faded, she turned and walked out of the chamber without another word. In the corridor outside, she activated her secure communication link to Earth. The connection was encrypted with technology the Council did not know humanity possessed. Her message was 4 words long. They chose this. Prepare. 12 light-years away. On a scarred blue planet orbiting a yellow star. The message was received. Generals looked at each other across a table deep underground. A countdown began, and in the cold darkness of the asteroid belt, 800 warships began to wake up. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The 3rd Compliance Fleet departed from the military staging grounds at Vekar Station 3 days after the vote. It was a force of 1,200 warships, each one carrying enough firepower to reduce a continent to ash. Battlecruisers the size of mountains, destroyers that moved like predators through the void, carrier vessels loaded with tens of thousands of strike craft. It was not the largest fleet the Council had ever assembled, but it did not need to be. This was not a war. This was an errand. Fleet Marshal Torek Anvitas stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Burning Decree, and watched the stars stretch as the fleet entered faster than light travel. He was Kyle Vori, a species known for their military discipline and their complete lack of imagination. They were tall, broad, covered in plates of natural armor, and they followed orders the way water followed gravity. Anvitas had pacified 11 worlds in his career. He had put down rebellions, crushed resistance movements, and glass-bombed 3 separate civilizations into submission. He was good at his job, and he considered this particular assignment an insult to his record. Humans, a Tier 7 species. No fleet. No orbital defenses worth mentioning. No allies. This would take less than a single rotation. He would be back at Vekar Station before his evening meal cooled. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. 1,200 warships arranged themselves in a standard compliance formation, a wide arc designed to project maximum intimidation. Anvitas gave the order, and the fleet broadcast its message on every frequency that the human communication systems could receive. By order of the Galactic Council Imperium, the species designation human is hereby subject to corrective reduction. Population centers will be targeted in accordance with Edict 7 Omega. Resistance will result in increased allocated casualties. This action is lawful under Section 44 of the Galactic Compliance Code. You have been informed. You have been informed. That was it. No negotiation, no ultimatum, no chance to surrender. The message was not a warning. It was a notification. The Council was telling humanity what was about to happen, not asking for permission. Earth's orbital defense grid activated immediately. It was a network of satellites, missile platforms, and energy weapons that humanity had built over the past 2 decades. By human standards, it was impressive. By galactic standards, it was a toy. The 3rd Compliance Fleet tore through it in 11 minutes. Satellites were vaporized. Platforms were crushed. The debris rained down through the atmosphere like burning confetti. And then the bombardment began. Anvitas had studied the population maps. He knew where the humans were concentrated. He knew which cities held the most people, which regions had the highest density, which areas would produce the highest casualty counts with the fewest expenditures. This was mathematics, not malice. He was a professional. The first strikes hit South Asia. Mumbai was the first city to die. A relativistic kill vehicle, a simple metal rod accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light, struck the heart of the city at 2:47 a.m. local time. The impact released energy equivalent to a nuclear weapon. The blast wave flattened everything within 30 kilometers. The heat flash ignited everything within 50. 12 million people died in less than a second. Then Dhaka, then Jakarta, then Manila. The kill vehicles fell like rain. Each one was precisely targeted, precisely calculated, precisely devastating. The fleet did not waste ammunition. Every shot counted. Every shot killed millions. Across the planet, the horror unfolded at a speed that the human mind could barely process. In the time it took a person to scream, a city was gone. In the time it took to run for shelter, a nation was burning. The strikes moved across the map with mechanical efficiency. Lagos, Cairo, Karachi, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Kolkata, Kinshasa. The death toll passed 300 million in the first hour, and the galaxy watched, because the Council had made sure of that. Every moment of the bombardment was broadcast live on Galnet, the galaxy-wide communication network that connected every civilized world. Trillions of beings across thousands of star systems watched the blue planet burn in real time. The broadcast was high quality. The cameras were positioned to capture maximum visual impact. The Council wanted everyone to see this clearly. This was not hidden. This was not secret. This was a public lesson. On the trading floors of Valesi Prime, merchants paused mid-transaction to stare at screens showing mushroom clouds blooming across Earth's surface. In the universities of Threk, students watched in silence as cities they had never heard of were erased from existence. On the military stations of the Kyle Vori, soldiers nodded in approval. This was proper. This was how order was maintained. The bombardment continued for 6 hours. 6 hours. That was all it took to kill 1.2 billion human beings. 1/7 of the entire species, erased in less time than it took to fly from one side of the planet to the other. The death toll was so massive that the human mind could not hold it. It was a number that stopped being a number and became something else entirely. It became a weight, a darkness, a wound in the fabric of a species that would never fully heal. When it was over, Fleet Marshal Anvitas surveyed the results from his command bridge. Smoke and dust covered vast sections of the planet. Fires burned across 3 continents. The oceans near the impact zones were churning with displaced water and debris. Electromagnetic interference scrambled most of Earth's remaining communication systems. Anvitas was satisfied. The operation had been completed within acceptable parameters. Casualties were within the range authorized by Edict 7 Omega. Ammunition expenditure was below projected estimates. He noted this in his official report with the same tone a factory manager might use to describe a productive shift. The fleet pulled back to a holding position near Mars and broadcast its final message to Earth. The corrective action authorized by Edict 7 Omega has been completed. The species designation, human, will submit unconditional compliance to the Galactic Council Imperium within 10 standard rotations. Failure to comply will result in additional corrective measures up to and including full planetary sterilization. Then they waited. On Galnet, the reaction was exactly what the Council had expected. Commentators from the elder races described the bombardment as restrained, measured. Some even called it merciful. After all, the Council had only killed 1.2 billion. It could have killed all of them. It could have cracked the planet open and let the molten core spill out into space. The fact that it did not was, in their view, a sign of the Council's wisdom and restraint. The mid-tier species said nothing publicly. Privately, many of them felt sick. But sickness was not enough to make them speak. They had seen what happened to species that spoke against the Council, so they swallowed their disgust and went back to their lives. The client states watched with dead eyes. This was nothing new. This was what the Council did. This was what the Council had always done. The only thing that changed was the name of the victim. But there were a few species that reacted differently. The Valesi, a small confederacy of worlds near the galactic rim, had maintained quiet friendship with humanity for years. They were a gentle species, known for their art and their empathy and their complete lack of military power. When the bombardment began, the Valesi ambassador to the Council left the chamber and did not return. That night, the Valesi Confederacy sent a coded message to Earth on an encrypted channel. It was simple. It said, "We are sorry. We grieve with you." They expected no reply. They assumed there was no one left to reply. Deep beneath the Swiss Alps, in a bunker complex that had survived the bombardment because the Council did not know it existed, Director Ilara Vasquez was alive. She was watching the casualty reports scroll across her screen. The numbers climbed and climbed and climbed. Each number was a name. Each name was a life. Each life was a universe that had been snuffed out because an alien 900 years old had decided that humanity was a weed that needed cutting. Around her, the surviving leadership of the United Defense Compact sat in stunned silence. Generals who had spent their careers preparing for this exact scenario found that preparation meant nothing when the reality hit. Some were crying. Some were staring at nothing. One had stepped outside the room and not come back. Vasquez did not cry. She had cried already, in the first hour, when Mumbai was hit. Mumbai, where her mother had been born. Mumbai, which no longer existed. She had allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of grief. Then she had wiped her face, straightened her back, and become something else. Something harder. Something that would not break no matter how much weight was placed on it. She stood up. The room fell silent. "They want compliance," she said. Her voice was steady. It was not loud. It did not need to be. "They want us to kneel. They want us to crawl to them and beg for mercy and accept whatever scraps they throw at us. They want us to be grateful that they left any of us alive at all." She paused. She looked at every face in the room. "That is not going to happen." She pulled up a screen showing the Sol system. Hidden markers appeared across the display. The asteroid belt, Titan, the Kuiper belt, Mars, Jupiter's moons. Hundreds of markers, each one representing a piece of infrastructure that the Council had never seen, never detected, never imagined. "Activate Protocol Prometheus," she said. "All of it. Everything. Wake them up." The order went out. And across the Sol system, in the cold silence of space, things began to move. On the surface of Titan, beneath a kilometer of frozen methane, factory doors opened for the first time. In the asteroid belt, engines ignited on ships that had never seen sunlight. On the dark side of the moon, communication arrays pointed themselves at the stars and began to listen. On Mars, underground hangars released swarms of drones that rose into the thin atmosphere like wasps from a disturbed nest. The Black Fleet was waking up. 800 warships, built in secret over 2 decades, crewed by men and women who had volunteered for a mission they hoped would never be necessary. Each ship was a masterpiece of human engineering. Not copies of alien technology, but evolutions of it. Improvements, innovations, things that human minds had dreamed up by looking at alien designs and asking the most dangerous question in any language. What if we made it better? The galaxy did not know it yet. The Council did not know it yet. Fleet Marshal on Vetus, sitting in his flagship near Mars and waiting for humanity's surrender, did not know it yet. But the silence from Earth was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of something waking up. Something old. Something that lived in the bones of every human being who had ever lived. Something that had been born in the first cave where a human had picked up a rock and decided that it would not be prey. It was rage. Pure, cold, patient rage, and it was about to speak. 3 days passed after the bombardment, and Earth said nothing. The Council expected submission within hours. They expected a broken, weeping species to crawl forward on its knees and beg for the right to continue breathing. That was how it always went. Every species that had ever been subjected to a corrective action had responded the same way. Shock first, then grief, then surrender. It was as predictable as gravity. But Earth was silent. No transmission. No surrender. No plea for mercy. Nothing. Just a wounded blue planet hanging in space, wrapped in smoke and dust, saying absolutely nothing to anyone. Fleet Marshal on Vetus noticed the silence on the second day. He did not worry about it. He assumed that the human communication infrastructure had been sufficiently damaged to prevent a coherent response. He assumed that the surviving leadership was either dead or in such disarray that forming a message was impossible. He sent a brief update to the Council. Compliance expected within the designated time frame. No significant resistance detected. Supreme Arbiter Korath Velshan received this report on Drathos and read it twice. He was not as comfortable as Anvitus. Korath was old. He had seen thousands of species break under the Council's weight, and in all those thousands of cases, the breaking had been noisy. There were always transmissions, frantic calls for help, desperate attempts at negotiation. The silence of a species that had just lost 1.2 billion of its members was unnatural. It was wrong. It was like watching a wounded animal go quiet instead of screaming, and any hunter knew what that meant. He ordered a reconnaissance probe sent into the inner Sol system to observe Earth directly. A small, fast, sensor-equipped vessel. It would slip past the human planet, gather data, and return within hours. The probe entered the Sol system at high speed, running silent with minimal emissions. It passed the outer planets without incident. It swept past Mars. It angled toward Earth. It never came back. There was no explosion, no distress signal, no debris. The probe simply stopped transmitting. One moment it was there, the next moment it was gone, as if the darkness of space had simply swallowed it whole. Korath stared at the blank sensor readout for a long time. Then he sent a second message to Anvitas. Increase sensor vigilance. Report any anomalies immediately. Anvitas obeyed, though he considered the order unnecessary. He expanded his fleet's sensor range and pointed every detection array toward the inner system. What he saw puzzled him. There were energy readings, faint at first, then growing stronger. They were coming from the asteroid belt, from the moons of Jupiter, from locations scattered across the Sol system where nothing should have been. The readings did not match any known human technology profile. They did not match any known technology profile at all. He reported this to the Council. Anomalous energy signatures detected throughout the Sol system, likely residual emissions from damaged human infrastructure. No threat assessment warranted. He was wrong about that. He was catastrophically, fatally wrong. On Earth, the 3 days of silence had not been wasted. They had been the busiest 72 hours in human history. Beneath the surface, the surviving population was being organized with a speed and efficiency that would have stunned any species watching. Humanity had spent 40 years preparing for this exact scenario, not hoping for it, dreading it, but preparing for it nonetheless, because humans understood something about the universe that the elder races had forgotten. The universe was not safe. It had never been safe, and the only species that survived were the ones that prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. Emergency shelters that had been built in secret across every continent opened their doors. Underground supply networks activated. Communication systems that operated on frequencies the Council had never cataloged connected survivors to command structures. Military units that had been hidden among civilian populations revealed themselves and reported for duty. Within 48 hours, what had looked like the shattered remnants of a destroyed civilization had reorganized itself into something coherent, functional, and very, very angry. Director Vasquez addressed the surviving population on the third day. Her broadcast was carried through the underground communication network to every shelter, every bunker, every hidden receiver on the planet. It was not transmitted on any frequency the Council fleet could detect. As far as Anvitas knew, Earth was still silent. Vasquez stood in front of a camera in the Swiss bunker. She wore no uniform. She carried no weapon. She was a diplomat, not a soldier. But the look in her eyes would have made any soldier in history stand at attention. 3 days ago, she said, the Galactic Council Imperium killed 1.2 billion of us. Our families, our friends, our children. They did it because they could. They did it because they thought we were weak. They did it because they wanted the galaxy to see what happens to species that do not kneel. She paused. The silence in every shelter, every bunker, every hidden room across the planet was absolute. They showed the galaxy what they are. She continued. Now we show them what we are. Not victims, not livestock, not a species that breaks. We are human. And today, we remind the galaxy what that means. She outlined what was about to happen. She spoke clearly and simply, because the truth did not need decoration. The Black Fleet was ready. 800 warships, fully armed, fully crewed, positioned across the Sol system, in locations the Council fleet had never thought to look. Weapons systems that went beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen were online and waiting. The orbital defense grid that the Council had destroyed had been a decoy, a sacrificial layer designed to make the Council think it had won. The real defenses, the Aegis network, were still dormant, buried in orbits and on surfaces that the compliance fleet had not bothered to check because they had assumed there was nothing there worth checking. The arrogance of the Council was about to become the most expensive mistake in galactic history. In the asteroid belt, Admiral Kiran Morrow stood on the bridge of the UDS Retribution, the flagship of the Black Fleet. He was a lean man with dark skin and steady hands and eyes that had not been warm since the day Mumbai died. Mumbai had been his home. His parents had lived there. His sister, his nieces. He had watched the sensor data as the relativistic kill vehicle struck the city. He had watched 12 million lives, including every person he had ever loved, vanish in a flash of light that lasted less than a second. He had not spoken for 6 hours after that. When he finally did speak, his voice was calm. It had remained calm ever since. The people who served under him found that calm more frightening than any amount of screaming. Morrow reviewed the fleet status. 800 warships, organized into 12 battle groups. Each ship carried weapons that the Council had no defense against, because the Council did not know these weapons existed. Quantum-locked warheads that could bypass any shield by shifting their physical state at the moment of impact. Neural cascade emitters that could shut down every electronic and biological neural network within a target vessel. Gravity lance arrays that could compress the hull of a battle cruiser like a giant crushing a tin can. These were not alien weapons. They were human weapons. Built by human hands. Designed by human minds. Fueled by human fury. The alien technology had been the starting point, but humans had taken it somewhere the original builders had never imagined. Because that was what humans did. They took things apart. They understood them. And then they made them dangerous. On Mars, a secondary fleet of fast attack corvettes powered up their engines. On Titan, a wing of heavy bombers lifted off the frozen surface for the first and last time. Around Jupiter, missile platforms that had been disguised as asteroids opened their launch tubes and locked targeting solutions onto the compliance fleet's last known positions. The Aegis network activated. Across Earth's orbital space, thousands of hidden weapons platforms came online in a cascade that took exactly 4 seconds. Railgun batteries, particle beam projectors, kinetic interceptor arrays, point defense networks so dense that a mosquito would have had trouble getting through. The planet that the Council had just finished bombing transformed before the universe's eyes from a wounded victim into a fortress bristling with weapons like a sea urchin made of steel and fire. Anvidus detected the activation of the Aegis network. His sensor officers reported the readings to him with voices that had lost their professional steadiness. The energy output was enormous. It was impossible. 3 days ago, this planet had been defenseless. Now it was radiating more military power than some mid-tier civilizations possessed. For the first time in his long career, Fleet Marshal Torek Anvidus felt something cold settle in his stomach. It was not quite fear. He was Kael Vori. He did not do fear, but it was close enough. He opened a communication channel to Drathos. Supreme Arbiter, the situation in the Sol system has changed. Significant human military assets have been detected. Request updated orders. On Drathos, Korath Velshan received the message. He read it. He read it again. Then he sat very still in his ancient throne and thought about the human woman who had stood in his chamber and said 5 words. You do not want to do this. He had laughed. The entire council had laughed. Nobody was laughing now. Korath sent his reply to Anvidus. Hold position. Reinforcements will be dispatched. Do not engage until further ordered. It was the right order. It was also too late. Because while the council was still processing what it was seeing, Admiral Morrow was already giving the only order that mattered. He stood on his bridge, looked at the holographic display showing the positions of the 1,200 ships that had murdered 1.2 billion of his people, and spoke one word. Go. The Black Fleet moved. 800 warships lit their engines and accelerated out of hiding with a speed and coordination that should not have been possible for a Tier 7 species. They moved like wolves. They moved like a blade being drawn. They moved like the answer to a question that the galaxy had been asking for 200,000 years. What happens when you push the wrong species too far? The galaxy was about to find out. The Black Fleet came out of the dark like something that had been holding its breath for 20 years. Fleet Marshal Anvidus had positioned his 1,200 ships in a standard post-compliance formation near Mars orbit. It was a relaxed arrangement, spread wide, designed for intimidation rather than combat. Half his ships had powered down their weapon systems. Many of his crews were in rest cycles. There was no reason to maintain combat readiness against a species that had already been broken. When the sensor alarms began screaming, Anvidus was in his personal quarters reviewing his report to the council. He reached the bridge in 40 seconds. By the time he got there, his officers were staring at their screens with expressions he had never seen on Kael Vori faces before. Something very close to disbelief. 800 warships had appeared on sensors simultaneously, dropping out of short range faster than light jumps at distances so close to the compliance fleet that they were practically touching. The humans had jumped their entire fleet directly into the middle of his formation. The precision required to do that without collisions, without overlap, without a single ship arriving a fraction of a second too early or too late, was beyond anything Anvidus had ever seen. It was beyond anything he had believed possible. The human ships were not like anything in the GCI database. They were angular, dark, built with a brutal efficiency that had no interest in looking beautiful. They were covered in weapon arrays that his sensors could not fully identify. They radiated energy signatures that his computers could not classify. They were, in every way that mattered, completely unknown. For 3 seconds, nobody on either side fired. 3 seconds of silence in which 1,200 Council warships and 800 human warships stared at each other across the void. Then Anvidus gave the order to fire. The compliance fleet opened up with everything it had: plasma cannons, particle beams, guided munitions, kinetic accelerators. 1,200 ships poured their combined firepower into the human formation. The barrage was enormous. It was the kind of concentrated assault that had cracked planetary shields, shattered fortress stations, and broken the spines of civilizations that had been fighting wars for longer than humanity had existed. The human ships did not break. They did not scatter. They did not even slow down. The weapons fire hit human shields and did nothing. Not nothing in the sense of reduced damage or weakened barriers. Nothing in the sense that the most advanced weapons the Galactic Council possessed hit human defensive systems and simply stopped. Plasma dissipated. Particle beams bent away. Kinetic projectiles struck something invisible and fell dead, tumbling through space like thrown pebbles bouncing off a mountain. The bridge crew of the burning decree watched their weapons do absolutely nothing. And the cold thing in Anvidus's stomach became real, genuine, undeniable fear. Then a communication channel opened. The human admiral's face appeared on every screen in the compliance fleet. He was a dark-skinned man with calm eyes and a voice that carried no anger, no satisfaction, no triumph. It carried something worse. It carried certainty. "Fleet Marshal Anvidus," the man said. "My name is Admiral Kieran Morrow of the United Defense Compact. 3 days ago, your fleet killed 1.2 billion of my people. My city, my family, my world." He paused. "I am going to let you live long enough to watch what happens next." The channel closed, and the Black Fleet opened fire. What happened in the next 47 minutes would be studied by every military academy in the galaxy for the next 10,000 years. It would be analyzed, dissected, reconstructed, and debated by strategists and historians and philosophers, and none of them would ever be able to fully explain how a species that had been classified as Tier 7, a species that had been dismissed as primitive and harmless, a species that had been laughed at in the council chamber, had built weapons that made the most powerful military in the galaxy look like children throwing rocks. The quantum-locked warheads hit first. These were weapons that existed in a state of quantum uncertainty until the moment of detonation, which meant they did not interact with shields, armor, or any defensive system. They simply appeared inside the target hull and exploded. Council ships that had survived thousands of battles found warheads materializing inside their engine rooms, their ammunition stores, their bridge compartments. Explosions ripped through vessels from the inside out. Ships that had been firing confidently 1 second were split open like eggs the next, spilling fire and debris and bodies into the vacuum. The gravity lances followed. These were focused beams of gravitational force that could compress matter to a fraction of its normal volume. When a gravity lance hit a ship, the ship did not explode. It crumpled. The hull folded inward like paper being crushed in a fist. Metal screamed. Structural supports snapped. Entire vessels were compressed into balls of twisted wreckage in seconds. It was a horrible, silent, mechanical death, and it happened to ship after ship after ship. The neural cascade emitters were perhaps the most terrifying weapon of all. They broadcast a signal that disrupted both electronic and biological neural networks. When an emitter pulse hit a council ship, every computer on board shut down instantly. Navigation, weapons, life support, communications, everything went dark. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that every living being on board whose brain operated on electrical impulses also went dark. They did not die. They simply stopped. Crew members collapsed where they stood, their brains temporarily unable to process thought, their bodies still alive but their minds gone silent. Ships hit by neural cascade emitters became ghost vessels, drifting through the battle with their lights off and their corridors full of unconscious bodies. The human fighters were another shock entirely. Small, fast, crewed by individual pilots who flew with a recklessness that horrified the Council's tactical analysts. These pilots did not behave like rational combatants. They dove into formations of enemy ships at speeds that should have been suicidal. They used their own vessels as shields to protect larger human ships. They rammed, damaged enemy vessels when their ammunition ran out. They fought with a fury that went beyond training or discipline or duty. They fought like people who had personally watched their world burn and had decided that dying in battle was a perfectly acceptable price for the chance to hit back. The compliance fleet came apart. Not slowly, not gradually, but in great chunks. Entire battle groups were wiped out in minutes. The Council's formation collapsed. Ships that tried to flee were run down by faster human vessels. Ships that tried to fight found their weapons useless and their defenses meaningless. Ships that tried to surrender found that the humans were not accepting surrenders. Not yet. Anvidus watched the destruction from his bridge with the expression of a man witnessing the impossible. His fleet, the fleet that had casually murdered 1.2 billion people 3 days ago, was being dismantled by a species that was not supposed to be able to fight back. Ship after ship vanished from his tactical display. The numbers fell. 1,200, 1,000, 800, 500. He gave orders that no one could follow. He called for reinforcements that would never arrive. He tried to organize retreats that turned into routes. And through it all, the calm face of Admiral Morrow watched from the communication screens like a man observing an experiment whose result he had already calculated. After 47 minutes, it was over. Of the 1,200 ships in the 3rd Compliance Fleet, 1,184 were destroyed. Some were wreckage. Some were crumpled balls of metal. Some were dark, drifting ghost ships full of unconscious bodies. The space around Mars was a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen vapor. And the silent remains of what had been the Council's instrument of punishment. 16 ships survived. They survived because Admiral Morrow ordered his fleet to stop shooting them. These 16 vessels were deliberately left functional, damaged, crippled, barely able to move, but alive. Because Morrow needed them alive. He needed them to go home. He needed the galaxy to hear what had happened here from the mouths of the people who had lived through it. Anvidus was aboard one of the surviving ships. His flagship had been hit by a gravity lance that had crushed the rear third of the vessel, but the bridge section remained intact. He sat in his command chair and stared at the debris field that had been his fleet. He did not speak. There was nothing to say. Everything he had believed about the galaxy, about power, about the natural order of things, had just been shattered as completely as his ships. Then Morrow broadcast on Galnet. The signal went out on every frequency, on every channel, to every world and station and ship in the galaxy. Trillions of beings received it simultaneously. The same trillions who had watched Earth burn 3 days ago now watched something very different. The broadcast showed the debris field, thousands of wrecked Council warships tumbling slowly through space. Then it showed Earth, scarred and smoking but still there, still alive, still turning. Then it showed the Black Fleet, arranged in perfect formation against the backdrop of stars. 800 warships, barely scratched, weapons still glowing, engines burning steady and hot. Admiral Morrow appeared on screen. Behind him, his bridge crew worked in focused silence. His face was calm, his voice was even. There was no chest beating, no screaming, no dramatic speech about vengeance and fury. What he said was far more frightening than any of those things would have been. 3 days ago, the Galactic Council Imperium killed 1.2 billion human beings and broadcast it as entertainment. The galaxy watched our cities burn and our children die. Some of you approved. Some of you looked away. None of you helped. He let that sit for a moment. Now the galaxy can watch this. We are coming, not for conquest, not for empire. We do not want your worlds. We do not want your resources. We want justice. Every hand that signed Edict 7 Omega will answer for it. Every voice that voted for our destruction will answer for it. Every species that watched our people die and called it merciful will answer for what they chose to do and what they chose not to do. He leaned forward slightly, just slightly, but across the galaxy, entire civilizations leaned back. This is not a threat. This is a promise, and humanity keeps its promises. The broadcast ended. Galnet crashed. The sheer volume of traffic from trillions of beings all trying to react at the same time overwhelmed the network for the first time in its history. When it came back online, the galaxy was a different place. On Drathos, Supreme Arbiter Korath Velshan sat in his throne room and listened to the silence. The council chamber was empty. The representatives had fled to their quarters. His advisors were whispering about options and strategies and countermeasures, but he was not listening to them. He was thinking about a woman who had stood in his chamber and said 5 words. He was thinking about the laughter that had followed. He was thinking about how a species that his kind had dismissed as insects had just destroyed a fleet that should have been invincible. And he was thinking, for the first time in 900 years, about what it felt like to be afraid. The galaxy did not sleep that night. On 10,000 worlds, beings of every shape and size and biology sat in front of their screens and waited for what would happen next. For 200,000 years, the Galactic Council Imperium had been the only power that mattered. It had been the floor beneath every civilization's feet, the ceiling above every species' ambitions, the walls that defined the shape of the possible. And in 47 minutes, a species that most of the galaxy had never heard of had cracked it all open. Admiral Morrow did not rush. Humanity had waited 40 years. It could wait a little longer, but it did not wait idle. The first thing the Black Fleet did was take the relay network. The GCI controlled faster-than-light communication and transit across the galaxy through a vast system of relay stations. These stations were the nervous system of the Imperium. Without them, the Council could not coordinate its fleets, could not issue orders to distant sectors, could not maintain the web of control that held 4,000 species in line. They were the single most important pieces of infrastructure in the galaxy, and they were barely defended because nobody had ever been foolish enough to attack them. Human strike teams hit every relay within 500 light-years of Sol in 72 hours. Some were seized intact, others were disabled. A few were destroyed when their garrisons attempted to resist. The result was immediate and devastating. Entire sectors of Council space went dark. Fleets that had been moving to reinforce Drathos found themselves unable to communicate with command. Supply lines that had operated for millennia were severed overnight. The Imperium did not collapse all at once, but it staggered. And that stagger was enough. Then the messages began. Earth sent a transmission to every minor species, every client state, every suppressed civilization in the galaxy. It was short. It was clear. It was translated into 11,000 languages. The chain is breaking. Stand with us or stand aside. We ask nothing of you except that you decide, right now, who you want to be. The Imperium ends today. The first species to respond was the Valesi Confederacy, the same gentle people who had sent their coded condolence to Earth 3 days after the bombardment. The Valesi had no military. They had no weapons. They had no ability to contribute to a war in any meaningful tactical sense. But their ambassador stood in front of a camera and declared, with shaking hands and a steady voice, that the Valesi Confederacy stood with humanity. The declaration was broadcast across every functional Galnet channel that humanity now controlled. It was a small thing, a tiny species with no power declaring support for a cause that might still fail. But it mattered, because the Valesi were known. They were respected. They were considered wise and kind and honest. And when the wise and kind and honest stood up and said, "This is right," other species listened. Within hours, 14 more species declared support. Then 30. Then 60. Species that had been client states for thousands of years broke their chains and announced their independence. Species that had been silently plotting rebellion for centuries found their courage. Species that had been afraid for so long that fear had become their natural state looked at the burning wreckage of the compliance fleet and realized that the thing they had feared was not invincible after all. Not every species joined. Many stayed silent. Some actively opposed the uprising, siding with the Council out of loyalty or self-interest or simple terror. The galaxy fractured along lines that had been invisible for millennia but had always been there, hidden beneath the surface like cracks in ice. The Council scrambled to respond. The elder races called emergency sessions. They argued. They blamed each other. They demanded reinforcements from sectors that could no longer hear them. The military apparatus that had maintained order for 200,000 years found itself fighting on dozens of fronts simultaneously as rebellions erupted across Council space. It was chaos. The kind of chaos that comes when a system built on fear discovers that fear has an expiration date. Through it all, the Black Fleet advanced. Admiral Morrow led the main force toward Drathos in a steady, deliberate march that was designed to be visible. He wanted the galaxy to see humanity coming. He wanted every species to watch the fleet move through council space, system by system, relay by relay, and understand that this was not a raid or a skirmish. This was an ending. Along the way, allied species joined the formation. Valesi communication ships, Threkan scout vessels, armed merchantmen from species whose names most of the galaxy had already forgotten. The fleet grew. By the time it reached the outer defenses of the Drethari home sector, it was the largest combined military force the galaxy had ever seen. Human warships at the core, flanked and surrounded by vessels from over 30 species, all flying together for the first time in history. The Council's home defense fleet met them at the border of the Drethari system. It was an enormous force. The elder races had poured everything they had into this final line, thousands of warships from a dozen ancient species, each one crewed by soldiers who had been bred and trained for war over thousands of generations. In raw numbers, the Council fleet was larger. In experience, it was vastly superior. On paper, it should have won. But paper meant nothing against a species that had spent its entire existence fighting. The elder races had not fought a serious war in tens of thousands of years. They had fought punitive actions against helpless species. They had fought border skirmishes that were more ritual than combat. They had maintained order through overwhelming force applied against enemies who could not fight back. They had forgotten what it felt like to face an enemy that could. Humanity had never forgotten. Humanity had never had the luxury of forgetting. Every century of human history was written in blood. Every generation had known war. Every culture had warrior traditions. Every human alive carried in their genes the legacy of ancestors who had survived ice ages, plagues, famines, and each other. The elder races had evolved beyond conflict. Humanity had evolved through it. The Battle of Drethos lasted 11 hours. It was the largest military engagement in galactic history. Thousands of ships on both sides. Weapons that lit up the void like artificial stars, entire formations clashing and breaking and reforming across millions of kilometers of space. The Allied fleet took losses. Hundreds of ships were destroyed. Thousands of humans and Allied crew members died. The cost was real and it was heavy and it was paid without hesitation. But the Council fleet broke first. The elder race's line crumbled under the weight of human weapons that their shields could not stop, human tactics that their commanders could not predict, and human fury that their soldiers could not match. One by one, the great ancient fleets withdrew. The Drethari fought longest, because Drethos was their home, and they were too proud to run. But in the end, even they pulled back. The orbital defenses fell. The path to Drethos was open. Humanity did not bomb the planet. It did not fire a single shot at the surface. Not one. The order came from Vasquez herself, transmitted directly to Admiral Marrow from the bunker beneath the Swiss Alps. Not one shot. Not one. We are not them. Instead, human ships landed at the main spaceport of the Council capital. Soldiers in black armor stepped onto alien soil for the first time. They secured the Council building. They met no resistance. There was no one left to resist. Director Ilara Vasquez arrived on Drethos 14 hours after the battle ended. She had traveled from Earth aboard a fast corvette, crossing the distance in record time using transit routes that humanity had seized during its advance. She wore no armor. She carried no weapon. She walked through the corridors of the Council building with a security detail of 6 soldiers and entered the Great Chamber. It was the same chamber where she had stood 11 years ago as a young ambassador. The same chamber where she had listened to insults and swallowed her pride and played the part of the harmless human. The same chamber where she had said 5 words and been laughed at by 4,000 species. It was almost empty now. Most of the representatives had fled, but the elder race leaders were there. They had nowhere to go, and in the center of the chamber, on his ancient throne, sat Supreme Arbiter Korath Velshan. He looked old, not in the way he had always looked old, which was dignified and powerful and eternal. He looked old in the way that something looks old when it realizes it has reached the end. His forearms were folded. His black glass eyes watched Vasquez approach with an expression that was difficult to read. Vasquez stopped in the center of the chamber, the same spot where she had stood before. She looked up at Korath. The silence between them was vast. "You called us livestock," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the entire chamber. "You disciplined us. You killed our children and broadcast it as a warning to the galaxy. You sat in this chair and laughed while we burned." She paused. "And now you sit there and wonder why we are at your door." Korath said nothing. There was nothing to say. "We are not monsters," Vasquez continued. "That is what separates us from you. We could do to Drathos what you did to Earth. We have the power. We have the justification. Every species in the galaxy would understand. Many would celebrate." She shook her head. "But we will not. Because the moment we do, we become you. And we did not cross the stars and bury our dead and break your empire just to become the next version of the thing we destroyed." She told him what would happen next. The Galactic Council Imperium was dissolved. The hierarchical caste system that had ranked species by age and power for 200,000 years was abolished. A new governing body would be established, the Galactic Assembly. Every species, from the oldest to the youngest, would hold an equal seat and an equal voice. No more tiers, no more masters, no more livestock. Korath and every leader who had signed Edict 7 Omega would face trial, not execution, trial, before a tribunal made up of representatives from every species in the galaxy, and their sentence, if found guilty, would not be death. It would be witness. They would be taken to Earth. They would walk through the ruins of Mumbai and Lagos and Jakarta. They would visit the mass graves. They would look into the eyes of the survivors, the orphans, the people who had lost everything. They would carry that weight for the rest of their long, long lives. Korath listened to all of it. When Vasquez finished, he was silent for a very long time. Then he spoke. His voice was thin and old and carried none of the authority it once held. "You truly will not destroy us?" Vasquez looked at him. "No." "Why?" She considered the question. "Because our dead deserve better than more dead. They deserve a galaxy that learned something from their loss. A galaxy that is better than the one that killed them." She turned and walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the oldest civilization in the galaxy sat in silence and tried to understand what had just happened to them. The trials took months. The convictions were unanimous. The sentence leaders were taken to Earth. They walked through the ruins. They stood in the mass graves. They looked into the faces of the survivors. Some of them wept. Some of them did not. But none of them were ever the same. The Galactic Assembly was messy. It was loud. It was contentious and frustrating and slow. Species that had never spoken to each other argued about trade rights and border disputes and resource allocation. Votes were close. Compromises were ugly. Progress was measured in inches rather than miles. It was, in every way, deeply imperfect. It was also fair. For the first time in 200,000 years, every voice in the galaxy carried the same weight. And that was enough. On Earth, where Mumbai had been, a memorial was built. It was not a building or a statue. It was a field. A vast, open field covering the entire footprint of the destroyed city. And in that field, 1.2 billion individual lights were placed. Small, gentle, steady lights, one for every soul lost. At night, the field glowed so brightly that it was visible from orbit. Ships passing through the Sol system dimmed their lights in respect. It became a tradition. Then it became a law. Then it became something deeper than law. It became a promise. Across the galaxy, a saying took hold. It started among the younger species, the ones who had been small and afraid and silent for so long. But it spread. It spread to the mid-tier worlds and the former client states and eventually even to the elder races themselves. It was spoken in thousands of languages, but the meaning was always the same. Do not touch the earth. They remember everything. And they will make you remember too. 5 years after the fall of the Imperium, on the anniversary of the bombardment, Director Alara Vasquez stood in the memorial field. She was the first human speaker of the Galactic Assembly now. She was older, tireder. The silver in her hair had spread. The weight she carried was visible in her shoulders, and her eyes, and the lines on her face. She stood among the 1.2 billion lights as the sun set over the place where Mumbai had been. The sky turned orange and red and purple. The lights began to glow. They stretched to the horizon in every direction, a sea of small, steady flames that said, "We were here. We mattered. Remember us." Vasquez looked up at the stars. She did not smile. There was nothing to smile about. but she breathed. She filled her lungs with the evening air of a world that had been burned and broken and had refused to die. And for the first time in 5 years, breathing did not hurt. The galaxy was watching. It was always watching now. And humanity was still standing.